Hello, in this video we're going to talk about the ideas in Chapter 3, Federalism and the Separation of Powers. Federalism can be defined as the constitutional division of power between two or more levels of government, and this is the American contribution to political science. This is the American invention. These different levels of government exist simultaneously and operate at the same time. And out of this federal system that has evolved over time, there have been basically three types of federalism. The first one, which existed from the founding in 1789 until about 1937 during the New Deal, the states were the more powerful level of government. With the implementation of the New Deal and executive power, which was used to create all of these different alphabet soup agencies during the Depression, which were hoped to fight the Depression and the economic problems of the Depression. Since that time, the executive branch has become the more dominant branch of the government. Cooperative federalism is another one, and that's the New Deal era that distributes grants and aid without national standards. It was hoped that these federal dollars injected into the economy, it's Keynesian economics, it's pump priming. John Maynard Keynes, a very famous British economist, believed that in economic recessions it was the job of government to inject money to the demand side in order to create the ability of people to spend money who would buy things, and in so doing, that slowly gets the wheels of the economy going again. This is opposed to the Chicago school or the Hayek school, which believes that this is a distortion of the marketplace, because all it does in the long run is lead to inflation and money not having very much value, because it's not real money, it's just paper created by government in order to get people to spend that dollar in order to get the economy going again. And those are the two main arguments in the economic sphere, the ideas of Keynes versus the ideas of Hayek. And they're still arguing about that today, whether or not free markets should be allowed to operate, laissez-faire markets, or whether or not the regulated government-controlled economy is a better way to go. Regulated federalism is imposed on states by the Congress. You have to meet certain national standards, and that was been used in the most recent Obama administration. The problem with that is if you want to get those federal dollars, you're going to have to conform to federal standards. And there are many sectors of American society that are opposed to that. They do not want Washington, D.C. telling them what to do in Peoria, Illinois, 900 miles away. The new federalism, which was done under Republicans Nixon and Reagan, block grants were used, where the federal government pays, but again, the states control on how that's going to actually be spent and implemented. What is the role of the Supreme Court? It basically engages in judicial review, which comes out of the court case Marbury versus Madison. The court, since that time, has umpired the constitutionality of legislation or legislative actions. William Marbury was a midnight appointee of outgoing President John Adams. Adams submitted all these appointments and left them on the desk of incoming Secretary of State James Madison in the new President Thomas Jefferson's administration. Madison did not give Marbury his appointment. Marbury sued. He asked the Supreme Court to issue a writ of mandamus against the Jefferson administration to give him his appointment. The Supreme Court, under Chief Justice John Marshall, disagreed with Marbury's conclusions and denied him his appointment. But in so doing, the Federalists lost this particular case. Marbury didn't get his appointment, but in the long run, they won the war because that established the principle of judicial review. And that's what the court has been doing ever since, and it's never been questioned. By reviewing this part of the Constitution, Marshall said that the Judiciary Act was wrong in forcing that court to make an incoming administration appoint somebody to a job. It's not the job of the court to tell the executive branch who they can and cannot hire. They struck down that part of the Judiciary Act, in so doing, determined its constitutionality or not. And again, the court has been engaged in this ever since. Who is Montesquieu? He is the French philosopher who actually created the idea of the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. He was also another guy who was opposed to the absolutism of monarchy. He was writing in the era of Louis XIV and his absolute control over France. What is separation of power? It's the division of power between branches of government. And again, all these different branches have different constitutional controls over the other branches. Lastly, how can power be separated? There's two big answers here. Checks and balances, giving each branch a stake in and influence over the other branches. The president can appoint justices to the Supreme Court, but the Senate can block those appointments. The president can veto legislation of the Congress. The Congress can override vetoes with a 2/3 vote. These are examples of checks and balances. And the other way power can be separated is federalism itself. It's the idea of what sphere is the proper authority to tackle a particular issue, a particular policy. And since that time, the arguments have gone on. And depending upon the spirit of the times or the zeitgeist of the time, that's going to shape people's Weltanschauung or their worldview on how that question should be answered. The pendulum swings back and forth through American political history between the forces who think that government should be more involved in the affairs of Americans, and then there's a reaction against that every generation or so, saying that we need to get government out of our lives and we need to have more liberty to make decisions on our own. This is a never-ending, ongoing experiment. That is the beauty and strength of the American Constitution. It's not some static, etched-in-stone document that never changes. It does change, and it evolves over time. And because of that, we've become a more democratically oriented society.